Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today's episode is a guest expert interview, and my guest today is Domari Dickinson, who is a mom and a conscious parenting coach. We had a really wonderful conversation about peaceful parenting in bigger families and about Domari's transition to peaceful parenting or conscious parenting, and also just sort of all of the inner work that we do as peaceful or conscious parents. If you are finding yourself in need of some support and you would like to be more calm as a parent, I invite you to check out not only this podcast, which will help, but my free How to Stop Yelling at Your Kids course, which is at sararosensweet.com/yelling. So head over there, you can sign up, get started today, and really, either get back on the peaceful train or get started on that train. It's really the place to start is always with ourselves, which is something that Domari and I talked about a lot in this episode today. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed meeting Domari and speaking with her. Hi, Domari. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Oh, yes. I actually just updated my bio and I think it's pretty cool. I haven't memorized it yet, so I am going to read it. So I am a magic making, joy bringing, cycle breaking, love filled, liberation minded disruptor. My 4 children experience this through our conscious parenting and unschooling adventures. My coaching clients experience this through my specialized programs and services that invite them to really identify their oppressive parenting practices while co-creating spaces that center freedom, respect, and autonomy. And then other people in the world get to experience this through the work that I do as a board member of the Alliance for Self-Directed Education, through my fun-filled, high-energy math tutoring sessions, and my Instagram account. That's kind of a compilation of educational, entertaining, and inspirational content.
That is a very good bio. Thank you.
Thanks. I love it now.
That's really good. I love it. Okay, so I when I was preparing for the podcast, I was reading about you on your website, and one of the things that jumped out at me is that you're relatively new convert to conscious parenting. Do you mind sharing, your story about that? Like what brought you to, and for anyone listening, you call it conscious parenting. I call it peaceful parenting. I personally have never been able to see a difference between those 2 terms, but we'll just use them interchangeably for today, unless you see a distinction.
I do. It's not really my distinction, but I feel like people use them in different ways. I am anti-labels, so whatever you want to call it is good. I feel like people attach to these labels and use them as a way to say like, what I'm doing is better than you, or you're doing it wrong because you're not doing it according to this label. So I do not advocate for either of them. But my journey, so I didn't start this way. I mentioned I have 4 kids. My oldest is 21 and my youngest is 7. I didn't transition until about 7 years ago. So it was with the birth of my last child. Yeah, it was about 7 years because she'll be 8 soon that I transitioned. And it was kind of like an aha moment for me. So I used to spank my kids, not really my oldest daughter because she was a quote unquote easy child. But when the boys came along, they were like, we're going to do what we want to do and have a lot of fun doing it. So there was one day, they're 18 months apart. So they're really not just close in age, but like they get along really well. And one day they were in their room and I heard what sounded like fighting. And I was like, wait, are they like fighting each other? Oh, no, we don't do this. So I ran into the room prepared to like spank them again. And when I looked at my youngest son's face, he looked terrified. And in that moment, I was like, this is not right. Like, this doesn't feel good. I'm supposed to be protecting him. And right now he's looking at me like he needs protection from me. And so in that moment, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Now, I had no idea what I was going to do. right? I was like, I don't know how not to spank my kids. Like, how else do I interact with them? So I started reading all the books and taking classes and watching webinars. And I realized a lot of other tools that could help me, but I also realized that that space was very white. And I'm like, I don't see a lot of people like holding classes or writing books or doing webinars that look like me. And so I started my journey to continue, right, to figure out how I could show up for my kids in a way that was centered in love and respect and that didn't harm them or my relationship with them. And really sharing those skills with other people who look like me to say, like, hey, y'all, this is for us too. Like, we get to do this too. And so along that journey, I started coaching other parents and really just connecting and sharing my story and just sharing the transition and how it was very, very difficult for me, but also the results that I was getting. So being able to see the shifts in my relationship with each of my kids and their relationship with each other and with other people, being able to share that as like, this is why I will continue to advocate for this for every child in the world.
What did you find tricky about it, about the transition, when you said it was hard?
Oh, yeah, it was hard, one, to accept that what I was doing was not what was best for my kids. It was easiest for me. So really taking the time to unpack, like, why was this comfortable for me? Why was this my go-to? I was never hit as a child, right? But there were so many things that I had internalized about being a single Black mother that made me say my kids have to show up in the world in this way. Otherwise, it means I'm not doing a good job. So that was not easy to acknowledge or to change that story in my head to say, because you're doing this doesn't make you a good mother, right? Because your children are quote unquote well behaved, that doesn't mean you're doing a great job because they're well behaved because they're terrified of you.
Right. So it was about not about changing your frame of reference, that you can have kids who are well behaved out from a different reason other than control and fear, right?
Yeah. And then saying, so if I don't want that to be our baseline, right? That idea that it's all about control and fear, what does that look like? What do I need? What do I need to shift for us to get there? And it was a shift in thought and a shift in words and a shift in the actions. So it was a lot of things that I had to change. And then again, coming from this place of, I have to be perfect, I have to get this all right, I messed up a lot. And so giving myself grace to kind of be messy in the process and to know that I was gonna screw it up and to continue to ask my kids for that same grace, right? Like, I know this still isn't the greatest. I'm still trying, right? And I want you to know that this is important to me because I want you to be safe. This is important to me because I want you to feel loved and I want you to feel comfortable in our home. And I want us to have a great relationship. And these things I realize now are not going to get us there.
Right. And there is a bit of a leap of faith, isn't there, in terms of like when you have been parenting a certain way because you were told this is the way that you should parent, and then you shift to a different way. Did you find that it was your personal faith? And I don't mean faith with a big F necessarily, unless that's what it was, but was it your personal faith in this new way, or did you find some mentors who could guide you and say, like, don't worry, this is going to work out for you in the end? Or what was it that gave you that faith that this new way of, the conscious parenting that you were shifting to was going to work?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think faith in the fact that what I was doing was not going to work. So it was that knowing that I can keep doing this, and doing this doesn't guarantee anything down the line, right? It doesn't guarantee that my kids are going to go to college and have a great job and have a great marriage and be great parents themselves. It doesn't. But what I realized is that it was moving me away from being able to say, like, I feel good about my relationship with my kids. I did also have mentors because, like you said, there was times I'm like, is this even going to work? So being able to see like Akila Richards and her daughters, like, oh, okay, like this is a thing and this can work. And then connecting with other parents who might not have been like so much further ahead in terms of the length of time they've been that has made this transition, but just seeing them go through it with me to say, like, okay, yeah, this happened today. I chose to respond in this way, and here was the result. And that felt good to me. So it was kind of that both and the faith in knowing that what I was doing wasn't working and seeing other people who were either in that moment or had already made this transition having success and having the relationship that I wanted to have with my kids.
Right on. Yeah, I think that a lot of parents that I work with can relate to that. I'm willing to try anything because what I've been doing hasn't been working. And if you have easy kids, you might not ever get to that point, right? Like you said, if you only had your first daughter, or if all your children had been like your first daughter, you would never have gone down this path of searching and finding a new way.
Yep. And so that was with my son. I'm like, you were a, a huge challenge for me, my oldest. He continues to be, he continues to challenge me every day. But I am so grateful because, like you said, I probably would not have even considered doing something different if he hadn't have been challenging me from day one.
Yeah, and I imagine that, you know, and it sounds kind of cheesy, but it is that gift of a challenging child, and you can like choose to like pick up that gift and work with it of, everything that it brings to you and what you have to look inside and the healing work and the self-compassion, or
Whew,
double down
yes.
on all of your authoritarian methods and pray that you don't lose them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't even know if that is the prayer for a lot of people when they choose to double down in that way, right? I wonder if they're really thinking about the future relationship with their child, or just like, if I control them really, really well, then they will show up in the world in this way. Like, this is the result that I can get from my child, and I can force them to be this way in the world if I continue to control them.
Yeah, which doesn't work. And the research
Sure
is pretty
doesn't.
clear on that.
It
Not only
doesn't.
can we say it's not what we want, but the research is pretty clear that that does not work. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. One more thing I wanted to ask you about is, there are a lot of parents who I work with who are on a similar journey to you, who, parents in our community or clients who have really shifted the way that they've been parenting, and they experience a lot of guilt and shame about the way that they parented before. And are there anything that you would say to those parents that you've learned? I mean, I imagine it's a lot of self-compassion, and it's maybe speak to that, or if there's anything else that you found was really helpful for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that continues to come up, guilt and shame. There are things that my oldest daughter is on spring break this week from college. It's her senior year of college. And she came back and shared some things about her childhood, right, that are still impacting her now. And she's like, I'm in therapy and I'm working through these things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I did this to you.
But man, good for her that she's only 21 and she's in therapy and working on these things. That's amazing.
That is amazing. And so it was really hard for me to hear this, right? And to hold space for that, because I wanted to ask so many questions like, okay, but what about this? But I changed this, and like, didn't this matter? And I'm like, but this is not the time or the space to do that. So it was rough to have that conversation, but to be so happy, like you said, that she's going through therapy and she felt comfortable enough to come back and share that with me. We've had conversations that she tells me, like, if you would never have changed the way that you parented, I never would have come home from college. I never would have wanted to be around you. I probably wouldn't even talk to you right now. And I was like, oh, that's
Oh,
harsh.
phew, eh?
Yeah, but so it's true. So I'd like to do a lot of reframing in those moments where I feel guilty, and try to find something to be grateful for. And a lot of times it's the idea that I am modeling for my children what it looks like to mess up, what it looks like to repair when you cause harm, and that we're having these conversations so they feel like they have some agency in their life, right? It's not just I'm telling you all the things that I'm doing, but it's like I'm also asking you for feedback, right? I'm asking you to help me figure out, did I try this thing? Do you felt like it worked? If you didn't, like, what could we try differently? So that they are knowing that these things are part of being in relationship with people, right? So not just if they choose to have kids, to be able to use these skills with their children, but also with any other humans that they're in relationship with, to be able to say, like, this doesn't have to be perfect. We can center love and respect, and it looks like, sounds like, feels like this. And when we mess up, which is okay, we will mess up. When we mess up, we have tools to be able to repair and to fix it. So I think that's really important. And then another thing that I share with some of my clients is that reframe, right? So there'll be times when, like, I'm at the grocery store and my youngest daughter is having a complete meltdown. And I could think, oh my gosh, people are like staring at me and thinking that I'm the worst mother ever and I can't control my kids. Or I can choose to think, well, the way that I respond to her in this moment is going to show people like, wow, she really loves her daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And like that I wish someone would have been able to hold space for me like that when I was having a meltdown
Mm-hmm.
in the grocery store. So really shifting that framing to go back to my goal, which is about making sure that my kids feel loved, safe, honored, and respected, and seeing like how does what I'm doing in this moment, right? So trying not to focus too much on the past or on the future, but how does what I'm doing in this moment move me closer to that goal?
Yeah, that's amazing. And you're living that big idea of, self-worth is not dependent on what you do. You can make mistakes, mess up, and you're still worthy and lovable, right?
Yeah, which was so important for me because I didn't get that message when I was a child. Like I never saw my parents mess up. I never saw them like argue, apologize to each other for doing this. So I was like, I don't know how to do this. Like I just can't, I have to be perfect. I can't be wrong. That was the message that I received. And so I'm very intentional about making sure that that is not, I'm sure there's a lot of things that all of my kids will have to work through in therapy at some point, but I want that to not be one of them. The idea that they have to show up as perfect in order to be worthy of love or respect.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm going to shift gears a little bit here because when I saw that you had 4 kids, I thought, okay, here's somebody that I can ask about something that I get asked about a lot. And I have 3 kids, and I have a lot of people who say, well, peaceful parenting is nice and all, but really, like, you can't really do it with more than, 1 or 2 kids. So I just, and before we started recording, you and I were talking about the whole list of things that people say when you're like, well, it's nice and all, but you can't really do it if this or if that or whatever. And we both agreed that you can always do it, and that there are things that make it a little more challenging sometimes, which one is if you have more than a couple of kids. Are there any big ideas that you might share with people with bigger families about how this parenting approach or philosophy might look a little bit different when you have a larger family?
Yeah, I think the approach, or maybe it's the expectations that might look differently, right? So the expectation that, I have this first child and I've figured it out and I'm able to do peaceful parenting in this way, and that I'm going to be able to do the exact same things with the next child or the next child. And I think, because our kids are so different and we are different as we learn how to mother another child, expand in our family, it's not always going to look the same. So the same things that you were able to use successfully with your first child might need to be tweaked because your second child doesn't respond the same way. Because you might need to change some of your habits to be able to have the spoons, right? To be able to show up in that peaceful way for 2 children now, 3 children now. I think a lot of people think, oh, I've done this peaceful parenting thing, I've figured it out, and now I can just put it on repeat forever and ever. But even if it's just one child, as that child grows and changes, as your relationship changes, your strategies are going to also need to change. Same thing with multiple children. So being able to say, this worked before, this is not working now, it doesn't mean that peaceful parenting won't work. It just means, what do I need to do to be able to be in this place where like I feel like we've got this under control for 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids. And then I think just being in that constant state of reflection and revision. So that part of saying like, okay, something about this isn't working, right? It's been really hard for me to show up in this peaceful way for the past 2 weeks. Something needs to change. What's happening? What needs to change? And what do I need in order to be able to make that change? And then try it. And not thinking that if I try what I thought was going to work and it doesn't work, then peaceful parenting isn't going to work. No, this one thing that I tried didn't work, and that's okay. So let me try something else. Let me make another tweak. And for people who have older children, and let me include my children in what these tweaks are looking like, right? Hey, y'all, we tried this. It didn't work. Can we come back to the table and come up with another thing that we can try to see if that will work?
And even little kids can do that too. Just, yeah. One thing I always think about too, with the more children you have, the more you have to make conscious efforts to take care of yourself better. You can kind of get away with not paying much attention to your own resources. If you have only 1 or 2 kids, but when you get up into the higher number, not that it's ever not important, but really consciously thinking, okay, I've got 4 people whose needs I'm trying to meet, and I really, really have to put myself first and make sure that I have the spoons, as you say, to do that.
Yeah. And I think, again, that is us when we are able to do that, we're modeling for our children that they get to do that too. So there are times when, on Saturdays, I'm like, hey, y'all, I need to be able to rest. That means I'm not cooking anything today. I'm not cleaning anything today. What do you need from me to be able to be good with that? So that just means on Friday, I have to go to the grocery store to get everything that they need to be able to leave me alone on Saturday so that they can fix their own meals and I don't have to do that. But that was a conversation that we had to figure out. Like, I need a day of rest, and explaining it's not because I don't want to hang out with y'all. It's just really hard for me to be a nice person when I'm tired. I want to be nice. You want me to be nice.
Yeah. My kids sometimes say, instead of what's for dinner, sometimes they'll say, is there dinner tonight? Sometimes I say, no, you can, I mean, because they're older, they can make their own food, right? So,
I'm
they
like, if
come
you can
home.
find it, you can eat it.
Yeah, exactly. Is there dinner? No.
There isn't.
Yeah. And I think another thing too, when we're thinking about bigger families, is it might not look like the cookie cutter approach that you see in blog posts or here on podcasts, even in terms of the, more chaos, more noise, just because more people in the house. And then that also, I know that there's a lot of people say that 15 minutes a day with each child and each parent, pretty much impossible with more than a couple kids.
Yeah, and maybe your kids don't even want 15 minutes a day with you, right? So I know that people have the best intentions when they share things like that. Like, do you gotta do this? And it's like, okay, now I'm going to feel guilty if I can't do that, right? Because I'm at work all day or my kids are at practice until 8 o'clock and we only have 2 hours that I actually get to see them and we have to eat and prepare for the next day in those 2 hours. But I think it's important to listen to your children. And again, I'm going to say this like a million times, but allow them to have those conversations like, what do you need from me? Right? My kids don't want to be, I'm sorry, that's not true. My daughter does, my youngest daughter, but my boys don't need 15 minutes of one on one time every day. They need me to respond to their questions and their needs in a timely manner because that impacts what they're doing for the day. When my son will ask me, if he needs one on one time with me, he'll say, can we watch a movie? That's like his code word for like, mom, I feel like we need some time together.
Are they teenagers?
He's 11, so that's my
Okay.
11
Yeah.
year old.
Yeah.
And my 13-year-old, the same way, he'll ask me if he can come with me somewhere when he wants to spend. So if I'm going to the store or to the gas station, he'll just say, can I ride with you? And I've learned like that's his way of saying like, hey, can we have some one-on-one
I
time?
need some mom
Sure.
time. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
sure.
really, I mean, that boils down to, it's just, how do you meet connection needs? And it might be through 15 minutes a day with each child if that works for you, but for a lot of people it doesn't. But there's still ways to meet connection needs, and it
Yeah.
doesn't
My
doesn't
connection
mean.
need for my 21-year-old is just to give her a hug in the morning when she wakes up. That helps her start her day. She's like, I am ready. And she's been like that since she was for as long as I can remember. And she's still like that. First thing in the morning, like, let me get the hug and I am good. My boys, when they wake up, they don't want a hug. They just want to know what's for breakfast.
Yeah. So tuning into your child. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, I'm gonna switch gears on us again because there's so many things that I want to talk to you about. As I said, I was checking out your website to just see everything that you have to offer, and I saw you had a free download, which we will put the link to that in the show notes, or people can find it pretty easily on your website. But it's called "Say This, Not That," and it just has some really nice highlights, sort of the approach. Do you mind if we talk about a couple of them?
Yeah, sure. Let me just say that this is not like I'm anti script, right? Because I feel like people try to make peaceful parenting, conscious parenting, positive parenting, whatever you call it, all about saying the right thing. So this is not an attempt to be like, oh, if you say this, then you're doing this thing the right way. But it is an attempt to help people start to shift their mindset and to change their thinking around how they're approaching their kids if they want to show up in a more positive, purposeful, peaceful way.
Maybe I can push back on you a little bit about the script thing, because I know the script is not the answer, but sometimes it's a great starting point. And sometimes people really just, if it's so new to them and they want, what can I say? So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just
It
not
is
the
not
end
the
point.
answer.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
not the
it
end
is not
point.
the answer. And some people present it as if just say these things and then you've got it. So like you said, I think it's a good jumping off point and a good way to be like, what can this even sound like? So right, if I'm not going, a lot of people also will say like, don't do this and don't say that. And I'm like, that's not really helpful if I don't have anything to replace it with. So if I'm gonna stop saying this thing, what can I try instead?
Even timeouts came about when pediatricians wanted something to tell parents to do instead of spanking. So not that I would recommend timeouts, but timeouts is probably better than spanking. So sometimes it's like a progression, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's funny when you say that it's not that, the answer is not what do you say, because so many times, I talk about when your kid's upset about something, first thing you want to do is empathize. And I have parents who say, I was empathizing. I said, I can see you're really upset about that. And it didn't work at all. And I said, well, what were you feeling when you said that? I was really pissed off and angry at them. Like, well, it's not empathy. If you just like, it's empathy isn't about what you say. It's about how you're feeling. And so if you're feeling angry, you can't empathize with someone when you're angry, but they get confused because they think I said the words, right? I said the words that sound like empathy, but it's really, it's
And
more
it
than that.
didn't work.
And what does that even mean anyways, empathy working? Okay, so one of your highlights in your handout is talking about focusing on emotional intelligence. And you said, instead of saying stop crying or get yourself together, what's something, if you want to take it less about the script and more about sort of the idea behind, what do you recommend that parents say?
So that is really like about, again, if you're telling me what to stop doing, that's not one helping me identify what's coming up for me. Like, why am I crying in the first place? So that is really helping them identify what emotions they might be feeling. And like you said, that empathy comes in also to say, like, I get it. I have been there also. So I'm not going to say like, stop crying. Or one of the things that one of my favorite this, I know this is terrible, y'all. I have grown a lot, but I used to tell my kids, like, get yourself together. Like, get it. I don't know what's going on. Get it together. But instead saying like, I can tell you're really upset right now. Right. And then for me, offering to support them. So I'm not the big bad person coming in telling you that your feelings aren't okay, but I'm saying like, I can tell something's going on. How can I help you? Like, what do you need from me in this moment? Sometimes my kids will say, I need a hug. I just need a minute alone. I don't need anything right now. Right. But letting them know, like, I'm still here for you, even when you're having these big feelings, versus telling you to stop or telling you to get yourself together and then looking at you expecting you to know what that means and saying like I've got you, versus you're not safe with me right now, your feelings aren't safe with me right now. It's the opposite of that. I like that because it's helping them identify, you know, we'll be like, use your words when parents get frustrated with kids, but we have never like ever given them the words. I don't know what to say right now. I just know that I've got some really big feelings. So helping them identify, is it because you're frustrated? Is it because you're sad? Is it because you're confused? Is it because you're scared? So helping to name these emotions, one, helps us start to understand what's happening with our kids. Like, they're crying, yes, but is it like a cry because I'm disappointed or a cry because I'm scared? Because those responses from me might be two totally different things to help them get regulated. And so I think that switch from I'm going to go to stopping this behavior to understanding what's causing it and helping my child understand that too is a really big switch.
Okay, two things that come up for me about that. One is that whole use your words thing. When kids are dysregulated, that part of their brain is not active, right? Their
It's
thinking
done.
brain is not activated. So they're crying because they can't use their words. They don't have any words accessible to them at that moment. I wish that we could just ban that phrase, use your words, from our parenting vocabulary. The other thing that comes up is sometimes I have, and I'm sure this comes up for you, parents who say, well, it's easy for me to do that if what they're crying about is actually important. So
Mm.
what do you say
Mm.
when right?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So how do you help parents find their way when they perceive it as not important what their child is upset about?
Yeah. I mean, just the idea of thinking about, if it wasn't important to them, they wouldn't be crying about it. Right. And I think that's a part of when I think about the difference between conscious parenting and the other words, to me, that conscious part is really about me asking questions of myself. So, like, why is it that I think that this is not important enough for them to have big feelings around? And doing that work to see, like, oh, it's because when I used to cry about this thing, my parents would tell me the same thing. That doesn't matter. It's okay. You can fix it. You can get another, whatever it is, to dismiss it. And then saying, like, what do I want to convey to my child about their feelings, right? And that it's okay to have feelings. Like, do I really believe that? One, like, do I believe that all feelings are valid? And then how do I show that in my own life? So if I'm saying this is not a big deal, you shouldn't be crying about this, it's not that important, where do I apply that to myself also? Like, what are things in my life that I'm not allowing myself to feel my big feelings around because I believe that it shouldn't be big feelings when it comes to this? Only, these are the only things that I'm allowed to have big feelings about. And the rest of it, I just have to stuff and deal with it.
So you're saying to find more compassion, you actually sometimes have to go back to self-compassion.
Yeah. And really that self-reflection and saying like, this doesn't really feel right. What is it in me that wants to hold on to this idea that you shouldn't cry because you don't have the toy that you want? You should just get over it. And like, where does that come from? What is that rooted in? And for me, a lot of the work that I do with parents is around decolonization, right? And really naming the systems that are coming up, that are at play, that are asking me to believe these things about myself, about my children, about the world in which we live, and how we're supposed to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really, really important and difficult work to do.
All right. Well, can you talk a little bit about that? The sort of from the micro of like the family and then out to the decolonizing bit?
Yeah, I mean, there are tons and tons of examples. And a lot of times when we do this work, it comes back to like some major systems like white supremacy culture or capitalism. And just we don't think about these things on that micro level about how we play into these systems and gatekeep and uphold these systems in our own houses. But, the idea that when my kid comes home from school, they have to immediately do their homework. And if they don't do their homework, then they can't go out and play, right? But that's the idea, like work is more important than play. Or that if you're resting, then you're lazy because you're not being productive, which again goes back to capitalism. And so being able to say, if I choose to not uphold that system, what would that look like in my family? It looks like we get to rest when we're tired. It looks like you are still worthy even when you're not producing. And being able to say that and name that and honor those things versus making sure that you have to do more and more and more and more and more and more and more. You've got to produce or it's not good enough. That, again, that work can be very difficult. And again, it's why I encourage people to do this work in community with other people, because if you've never done that, you might not know what it looks like to allow rest to happen for yourself or for the young people in your lives. But again, those systems are very tricky and they just creep in and you're like, oh, what is this? What is this about? So I think that question, whenever we're struggling with something with parenting, it's like, okay, what is really happening here? What is this really about? Is there something that I'm holding on to that I need to let go of to be able to show up for my child in the way that I want to? And is there some help that I need? Because I don't feel like we are always able to immediately or easily identify what we need to let go of, whether it's a thought, whether it's something that we're saying, or whether it's something that we're doing. So being able to say, like, what help do I need to be able to release these things? Who can help me do that? Or what can help me do that? And not feeling ashamed or like we're not doing it right if we have to go outside of my mind to be able to get that support, to figure out what needs to change.
When did you start unschooling? I know that seems like a drastic question, but I think it's all related, right?
It is related. This whole process was, I started, this deschooling process asking these kinds of questions. We formally have been unschooling, I don't even know. Years are confusing, but my kids, my boys, when they were going to school, so they were 6 years old, my oldest, and then my younger son was 5. And I realized I was working in schools at the time, and I just realized I cannot send you into these environments that I'm in every day, because I know that I had already started my transition to conscious parenting, and I realized I want you to feel loved. I want you to feel safe. I want you to feel supported. And I'm working really hard to create that environment at home. That's not what I would be sending you into. And I know that, right? Because I've lived on the other side. I was still training teachers at that point. And so I decided to homeschool, and it was very much, I'm just going to recreate school at home. And then you can just like lay on the floor instead of sitting at a desk. But the more that I went down this decolonizing journey, there was just so many things that I started to question. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be this way, right? I believed that it had to be this way because I believed in this lie of this is how I have to show up to be good in the world, to be productive, to be respected. And once I started letting all of that go, I'm like, oh, well, this whole idea of schooling or learning as I know it really, I don't believe that this has to be the way. And so the same way within our house, we're allowing my children to really have a voice and advocate for what they need. And, if something doesn't feel good to them, they can articulate that. It's the same idea around how they learn. And so together they're just like, we don't really need to be in a building to learn. And I was like, all right, let's see what that looks like. And there are so many things about our family that looks very different from other families because we continue to have these conversations and realizing like, this works for us. I know people think that it has to look this way, but we have decided like this is what needs to happen in this moment, right? Because it changes. But right now, this is what we need to happen in this moment for us to be able to live how we want to live right now. And so it's interesting. And a lot of times people will be like, so wait, what do you mean your kids are still awake and it's 2 o'clock in the morning? I'm like, well, my son one day, we went through this whole bedtime struggle and it was like, okay, it's going to be 8 o'clock. And he's like, well, can we stay up a little bit later? And then 9 o'clock and then 9:30. And then one day he just asked, why can't we just go to sleep when we get tired? I was like, whoa, I never even thought about that. Let's try it and see what happens. And ever since then, we have not had bedtimes, like official bedtimes. So that kind of exploration and that deschooling, right, that things have to look a certain way, definitely happened in conjunction with my transition when I transitioned my parenting style because they're so closely related.
Yeah, you really did like a life transformation, not just parenting transformation. It's very cool.
And people call it like peaceful parenting, conscious parenting, but I'm like, it really applies to relationships, right? About being in right relationships with other people and identifying that your kids are other people, like they are humans too. So
yeah, I mean, I have people tell me that all the time, that when they start really looking at these principles, they realize it improves their friendships, their marriage, work relationships, because they really are just relationship principles.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, thank you. Before I let you go, 2 questions. The first is, where can people find out more about you and what you do? Best place to send them?
Oh, either my website, which is domaridickinson.com, or on Instagram at Domari Dickinson. I'm not very creative, y'all. It's just going to be Domari.
No, mine, I'm sararosensweet.com, so I'm right there with you. And we'll put those links in the show notes, as well as the link to your download. And then the final question, which is one I ask all my guests, which is, if you could go back in time to your younger parent self, what advice would you give yourself?
That's a great question. In this moment right now, I would probably say trust your gut. There were so many decisions that I made that were based on trying to meet the approval of other people, not my children, not myself, that I think I definitely would have. It didn't feel right in the moment, but I'm still like, no, this is what I'm being told I'm supposed to do. And I didn't trust my gut. I didn't listen to my intuition. So I think I would have still needed to transition because I wouldn't have started off in as conscious, but I think it would not have taken as long for me to make that transition if I would have trusted my gut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got a couple of those too from looking back to my younger mother years. It's hard, and we have to remember that we have to forgive ourselves for not knowing then what we know now.
Yeah. And hold that same space of forgiveness for our children too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Domari. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you. This was amazing.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.